This city didn't just reduce homelessness, it almost eliminated it entirely. The program worked. The data proved it. It saved money. It had support from conservatives, liberals, and the Mormon Church. So why did they shut it down? And why is homelessness in Salt Lake City now worse than when they started? In 2005, a group of unlikely partners in Utah set out to solve a problem most cities had given up on. At the center stood Lloyd Pendleton, a conservative Mormon businessman who had spent decades in the private sector before leading the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to end homelessness. Pendleton's views changed after he studied the research of Sam Sambaris, a psychologist from New York who had pioneered a radical idea. Instead of making sobriety or treatment a condition for help, give people permanent housing. First, no strings attached. The model was simple. Secure an apartment, offer support, but don't force anyone to quit drinking or pass a drug test to get a roof over their head. It was a tough sell in Utah's political climate, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Some recent pilot projects in New York showed that people stayed housed, used fewer emergency services, and the public saved money. Pendleton brought this evidence to Utah state leaders and found unexpected allies. Liberals saw a chance to address a human rights crisis. Conservatives saw a way to cut costs and reduce the burden on jails, hospitals, and police. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, became a key partner, providing furniture, beds, and hundreds of volunteers to help people settle into new homes. The Salt Lake Valley Coalition coordinated the effort, merging data from shelters, health providers, and outreach teams to identify the most vulnerable people living on the streets. The plan went into effect statewide in 2005. The goal was clear: end chronic homelessness within 10 years. That meant targeting people who had been homeless for a year or more, or had cycled in and out of shelters repeatedly, often with disabilities. Instead of cycling people through shelters, detox centers, and jail cells, the coalition focused on getting them into permanent supportive housing as quickly as possible. The mechanics were straightforward but ambitious. Build or repurpose apartments, offer wraparound services, and keep the doors open to anyone who needed help, regardless of their current situation. This coalition, stitched together from state agencies, city governments, nonprofits, and faith groups, represented a rare alignment of interests. In a state known for its conservative politics, the willingness to adopt a model grounded in evidence, not ideology, set Utah apart. The new policy didn't just promise compassion, it was designed to be accountable, measured, and cost-effective. The groundwork was laid for a transformation few thought possible. Salt Lake City's housing. First experiment didn't just promise change, it delivered numbers that forced the nation to pay attention. By 2015, Utah officials reported a 72% to 91% drop in chronic homelessness, depending on the count used. The state declared it had reached what they called functional zero, fewer chronically homeless people than shelter beds available on any given night. For a brief window, the reality on the ground matched the boldest political claims. News outlets from The Washington Post, NPR, and NBC News ran stories on Utah's approach, holding it up as proof that a data-driven, bipartisan solution could solve a problem most cities had written off as unsolvable. Even The Daily Show sent a correspondent to Salt Lake, poking fun at how hard it was to find anyone still living on the street. The impact wasn't just visible in the numbers. State reports credited Housing First with saving the public money, up to $8,000 per person each year, according to estimates repeated by officials and advocates. The logic was simple: giving someone stable housing slashed their use of emergency rooms, jail cells, and shelter beds. Every dollar invested in permanent supportive housing was said to return $1.44 in avoided public costs, a figure that circulated in policy circles and made its way into legislative pitches and national think tank reports. The program's reach extended beyond Utah's borders. Cities like Houston and Milwaukee took note, launching their own versions of Housing First and tracking similar declines. Houston, for example, reported a 63% drop in homelessness over a decade after adopting the Utah model, while Milwaukee's numbers fell by more than 90% after prioritizing permanent housing and coordinated data tracking. National housing conferences cited Utah's coalition, a mix of conservative lawmakers, progressive advocates, and the LDS Church, as a rare example of what could happen when political differences took a backseat to results. For a moment, the data was undeniable. Utah's chronic homelessness problem, once considered intractable, had been brought to the brink of elimination. The city's coalition had proved that evidence-based policy, backed by a broad alliance, could achieve what decades of conventional wisdom said was impossible. The story was held up as a model until the political winds shifted and the evidence was pushed aside. In August 2017, Salt Lake City's approach to homelessness changed course. State and local leaders, under mounting pressure from business groups and residents in the Rio Grande district, launched Operation Rio Grande. The stated aim was to restore public order after a series of violent incidents, and open-air drug markets drew headlines. More than 120 police officers began daily patrols in the neighborhood, making hundreds of arrests within the first weeks. The policy now prioritized enforcement and public safety over housing placements. At the same time, the city closed its main downtown shelter, a facility that had housed up to 1,100 people each night. In its place, officials opened 3 smaller resource centers, each with a fraction of the old shelter's capacity. The new sites, scattered on the city's outskirts, were designed to offer specialized services but could only accommodate about 800 people combined. This shift fragmented the shelter system and left hundreds without a place to go, especially during winter months. Operating costs soared. Where the city once ran a single, centralized shelter, it now faced higher expenses for transportation, security, and staffing at multiple locations. Critics pointed out that the per-person cost of shelter nearly tripled, even as fewer people found beds. The decision to dismantle the existing system was not backed by new data or a spike in homelessness rates, but by visible complaints about encampments and public disorder. Policymakers, many unnamed in official records, moved quickly, redirecting funds away from permanent supportive housing and toward enforcement and emergency shelter operations. The coalition that had once united conservatives, progressives, and faith leaders around housing first fractured under the strain of political pressure and public anxiety. By 2018, the visible signs of unraveling were impossible to ignore. Outdoor sleeping in Salt Lake City nearly doubled in just 2 years, while the number of people left without shelter continued to rise. The state's own point-in-time count reported over 3,500 people experiencing homelessness in 2022, a 25% increase from 4 years earlier. When the 2023 numbers came in, they showed a 9.6% jump in Salt Lake County alone, with first-time homelessness spiking by 53%. These were not just fluctuations, they were the sharpest increases since the original Housing First rollout. The spending kept climbing. Between 2017 and 2023, Utah poured more than $580 million in public funds and $680 million from private sources into homelessness programs. Yet, for all this investment, the results were moving in the wrong direction. A state audit released in 2017 found that over $100 million had been spent with no reliable way to track outcomes. The Homeless Management Information System, once a model for coordinated care, had broken down. Data was fragmented across agencies, making it nearly impossible to know if people were actually moving into permanent housing or cycling through shelters in the streets. The audit spokesperson's words landed hard. "We are spending more than ever, but we cannot say with confidence whether our interventions are working." For advocates and former coalition members, the message was clear. The political choice to abandon housing first had come at a steep price, not just in dollars, but in lives left outside, and in the loss of a once-proven solution. Today, Salt Lake City's chronic homelessness rate is higher than before housing first began. The bipartisan coalition that once achieved measurable, cost-saving results was undone by politics, not evidence. When policy ignores data, progress can vanish overnight, leaving real lives and proven solutions as collateral damage. What would you do differently?